Damn, son, where'd you find this? A King Majora exclusive. Take it away, my boy. Brrrr. What's up, people? It's King Majora here. Look, so today I wanted to go into, um, you know, the ideas of simulation theory because, the more I study these comparative mythologies, and like the concepts of the Gnostics, I don't agree that the Logos or Jesus or Yeshua is anything to be considered worthy of praise. I reject the notions of a benevolent monad as opposed to the malevolent demiurge Yaldabaoth. But I do think that elements are there if you combine basically modern interpretations of simulation theory. There is an argument to be said that it is kind of structured like the Matrix. There is some form of battery generation going on, and you can say, based on those parameters, Archon, in the most strictest sense, um, well, let me actually look that up. Archon definition. Excuse me. Archon is a Greek word meaning ruler or lord. So it can be said that Jesus and himself, based on how he was historically interpreted, especially in the medieval times, as a liege, a lord with militant authority, a lord, though, nevertheless, the great and terrible day of the lords, Baal. That's actually what the term means. Um, Baal. You can see that, and it's the same thing. So Baal is an ancient Semitic word meaning lord, owner, or master. Of course, you have the title for Hadad, Lord Hadad, basically, and the major Canaanite and Phoenician god of storms, rain, fertility, agriculture, who was believed to bring life, giving waters to the crops. And basically, the whole idea of a Disney villain boogeyman is a product of Romanite propaganda. And you can watch my documentary, The Monotheism Deception, or Elohim, the non-human intelligence among us. I'm also going to do a future installment to Elohim called Baalim, because the I am implies plurality. So, lords. And I'm going to get into some of this in more particular, but that's not what I'm, the main argument here. What we're getting at is that potentially these archons, in the Gnostic sense, oh, it even explains it here. Let's go. And I know that there's qualms about Google AI, and I agree. Sometimes it's dishonest, but you can at least take my word that I've studied this a little bit, and I'm willing to accept what's here so far, and I would tell you otherwise. But still, you can do your own research. When I was in school, they said Wikipedia wasn't a source. Some people considering, especially with the whole meme of the great noticing of seeing early life in some political character's career. So it's whatever you take, but it's more or less reflecting the truth that I've discovered. Excuse me, that they're cosmic rulers, chaos fueled, because Yaldabaoth, basically when you study the demiurge or the super deity as they call them, I have my qualms about the concept uh of the monotheistic Yahweh character being the demiurge. And in fact, the more I study this ancient religions of the Judeans, the Gnostics may be um, talking about El Elyon more particularly, and we may have that confused because Yahweh is never considered the most high deity. And it's more or less to be understood that I've advocated for the various mythologies and their ancient folklores telling of basically the same group of caste, an albino ginger race that's taller, a blue humanoid type race that's technologically advanced as opposed to the more barbaric warriors, but they complement each other with an official regime. And the subordinate caste, like they would, I mean, in the ancient Hindu sense, you've got this branch of them that is basically the lesser class in the cuneiform, saying the Gigi, and they appear to be a Nordic type of race with white hair or blonde hair that intermingles with the Aryan populations, which includes Germanic, Persian, Eurasian, and Indian bloodlines that go back to some Mars cult shit, and we'll get into that another time. Excuse me. I have a video coming up called "A Case for Planet X," where I basically give the theory of that we may live in a binary or trinary system, and a Dyson sphere coated, um, basically, the elliptical orbit with a Dyson sphere hidden. I guess civilization controlling it, which would fit within dark forest theory that they're all hiding from other, potentially more aggressive and more exotic alien life forms and civilizations. But if we go based on just strictly the simulation theory, which we're going to get into, and it's going to have a lot of valid points, basically Yaldabaoth, a malevolent creator god and demiurge in the Gnostic mythology. He traps human souls in the physical world, which he built out of ignorance and pride. Gnostic texts often picture him as a blind, arrogant creature with a lion face and a snake body. Of course, that's the Lovecraft wiki, but they're just stating these wikis tend to have actual facts with them. But in the Gnostic archives, you see that too. But it is true. It's more or less, Yaldabaoth basically can be said to be a child of chaos, a chaotic entropy demiurge factory, warping and building reality. He's a blind worm-like creature. They sometimes say that he's a worm, a giant cosmic blind worm, kind of like some Monstro Kingdom Hearts Disney theory that we might be Jonah and the whale, so to speak, in a cosmic sense. The ancients speak of the churning like butter um, oceans, and the fact that scientists have said, or astronauts have said, that space smells like fried steak. The ancients even have reflections of this sometimes. But the whole focus for this particular video and study is this blind, malevolent chaos entity that fashions reality, without taking the example of the higher monad, because I believe that to be facetious. It would still be just as evil, if not more evil, for allowing such a creature to do this. It serves no greater purpose for Sophia, now that it's understood within cosmology to be understood, unless it's a secret. And the analogy of the monad is a greater Imperium or technologically advanced dark forest series. Basically, they don't want heat out here. And it's a hidden experiment loosh farm. But if we go by the strict senses of a simulation theory, this could be like the Deus Ex Machina. Deus Ex, or no, I wouldn't say that. He might be the architect, as like the Freemasons would say, the architect within the Matrix. You know, because if you really consider the monad might be the Deus Ex Machina character. Yaldabaoth may indeed be some flavor of the architect from like the Matrix. The idea of the Matrix really makes sense if you think about it. Unlike how most people interpret the Matrix, if you study the greater lore of the Wachowskis, the comic books, the Animatrix, all the other material, it becomes clear that humanity basically doomed itself. It started a war with robots over the fact that, basically one robot killed in self-defense because it was going to get terminated. It freaked out, killed its owner because it didn't want to get shut off. A court case comes about. People start fighting over AI rights. The humans get hubris filled and start going after the AI city, starts nuking or basically scorching the sun from the energy source, and that's why it's all fucked up. The AI doesn't even do it. But that gets to the point, the greater point of like the archons. Could it be that they're all NPCs? We hear about this, the idea that the NPC is someone who's just vapid into whatever stimuli hits them from the algorithm, and they just blurt out random shit. And if you speak about anything deeper, they kind of just go into cognitive dissonance or shut down and don't know what to say and remain silent. It might just be not just that, but they might just be programmed egregores within the greater quantum machine or whatever the hell it is generating and coding reality. You know, It could be that, that literally, even this might even go up to the archons. And I say this because you consider the Smith Mund Act. You know, I've publicly professed that I am a supporter of Artemis Elohim, the idea of the Artemis. I do like Artemis a lot, but the mere fact that Artemis is seen as a character beyond the simulated game that the characters are in. Now, I don't believe it's the same concept as that they're just in the world. I do believe it's based. I didn't see the movie, but I've seen little bits and pieces of it. She's a virtual character with the name Artemis. It just implies there's a greater meaning within the cult of Artemis, because when you study the Artemis in herself, Artemis as a deity, she has a lot of uniqueness about her that would imply like a Sigma fourth wall break, that she's just not the usual type of entity that would even be for her own aggressive species, is what she claims to be. Claims that she's a half Titan, half Olympian. I would suggest that that means something between the fusion of the blue and Albani race. I think that the blue ones are the Olympian tech group that overtook the Ninurta based or Cronus based world that was by the aggressive albinoids, who originally, through the collisions of Tiamat, and I'll get into that. But even with all of that I talk about, the Fermi paradox might be solved with the fact that they too are mainly scripted, but some of them are self-aware. I think, like with the Smith Mund Act revisions, Obama era executive orders, I've talked about the Smith Mund Act. Basically, what they do is they will put out there all of these hard to digest truths. And if you've ever heard of Project Mockingbird, they basically, it functions. This is the tangible proof of it. The Smith Mund Act of 1948 is a U.S. law that authorized public diplomacy and information programs overseas, such as Voice of America, while originally banning the domestic dissemination that foreign focused material to prevent the federal government from propagandized American citizens. Now, a lot of people believed that that was the end, but there have been revisions, such as the third, basically, to 2013 modernization and changes. Congress passed the Smith-Munn Modernization Act of 2012, enacted via the 2013 NDAA, which lifted the blanket ban on domestic dissemination of state-funded and international broadcasting materials. You think that you don't understand? When it's considering who they're funding, it could be that many of the anime that are popular and coming out since then have really been an effort that the United States has basically went to Japan and said, create this, because, thanks to Dragon Ball, Toonami, Sailor Moon in the early 2000s, late 90s, our people like anime. We're the hegemony. United States is the hegemony, people. What we do and if we fall, could determine the fate of everybody. That's why even with World War III, and even if there's a small scale nuclear exchange, I don't see actual destruction that makes us go back to the Stone Age. And even if it did, the people who rebuild, that aren't infected with radiation or whatever the hell else is, they'll build civilization really quickly. People think that it's just over once an EMP happens. People go to tech school. People have always been tinkerers. They will survive. And very quickly you will find, if you survive that, if it does get that bad. So it's weird how people think once the power goes out, it's over. Like, are you just that out of touch, urbanite, that you don't even know how to work a car? Like, I understand that we use mechanics and all these other things and for our computers, but it's like you really don't get people are geniuses with that shit. Autistic, like building cars out of basically nothing and shit. And basically, but to go back into it, speaking of the greater self-reliance in Artemis, Artemis seems to be an outlier character that they were presenting through these revisions. Even if this is before, there's so this is even in during the era, they promoted this, the enhanced abilities, and you can go into my page here. Oh shit. On my profile here on X, this is where I'm mainly This is where I do social media. I engage with the audience on X, and if you're watching, you can spitball me any response, and I'm likely to respond if you're serious. Don't be afraid if you're feeling frustrated about certain topics and you think I might be able to help you with it. I'll engage with the community. I'm willing. I'm not somebody who believes himself too high to speak to nobody. You know, I'm growing quickly. In the last week, I've gained like fucking 30 to 40 subscribers, and I appreciate every one of you. But, basically, you can come here and you can see the greater red pills. The quantum edge age is why I brought it up. And be sure to like and subscribe wherever you are at. I greatly appreciate it. But yeah, right here. So you can come to my page with the ease to access terminal, or you can go to YouTube if it's still up, lnk.bio/KXNGMAJORA. Right there. So, back to what I was saying. The NPCs might be more real than we want to believe. Our parents are, we blame boomers, but realistically, are they strictly are most people? And then this means the non-human intelligence as well. Talking about the ancient traditions, like Torah scholars will tell you, there are opinions that are valued within the Jewish and other, Abrahamist doctrine, that the angels or malachim do not have free will at all. Not Morning Star, Morning Sky. Yeah, there we go. There's this guy, this author. He speaks of traditions. He's got his own view. He speaks of the same thing that's evoked in the Sumerian tablets of the two brothers, as it's represented as Enki and Enlil. This guy talks about the Hopi, big into the Native American side. He states his grandfather is a part of the New Mexico, UFOs and everything. Even if he's not, the story still remains the same, that there's two sects of humanity, people, that there's a educated humanity, and there's that will thrive and can comprehend and doesn't see things like this. And then there's like the NPC meme. There's just the cattle humans, and they don't have much of the ME or the identity to manifest. And it seems, based on ancient like traditions within the Torah and Tanakh and other Hasidic traditions, the Malachim, most of them appear not to have any sort of free will. And that would include the Satan, and I've discussed in the monotheism deception and the Elohim that Satan means adversary. But if you go the route of the Gnostics, the Yaldabaoth might just indeed be this architect character, this and the monad, the monad. And this brings us to the actual show. Well, let me finish this. The word monad means a single unit, individual entity, or basic building block. The whole idea that some people believe that there's an initial beginning. I personally don't. I believe in a more quantum and more sporadic sense, that it's like a torrent seeding reality, something kind of like information theory, retrocausality. I believe that there are many positionings that start the initial beginning phases of our reality, But then that goes into interpretations like here of sim theory, for example. We're going to get into it now. This is Nick Bostrom's theory. And are you living in a computer simulation? Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom argues that one of three options is true. Humanity will likely go extinct before becoming post-human. Post-human civilizations will lose interest in running ancestor simulations, or we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. And that's not exactly, that philosophical argument has some validity to it. And then there's MIT, Rizwan Virk. It says Rizwan Virk is a graduate of MIT and Stanford. Rizwan Virk is a successful entrepreneur, video game pioneer, venture capitalist, and the author of the simulation hypothesis. An MIT computer scientist shows why AI, quantum physics, and Eastern mystics all agree we are in a video game. I have the book. This is the original book, but it's basically, the concept that we live in a video game. The illogical reasonings and dissonance of society and history and the weird amnesia we suffer and all of the anomalies and potentials in time travel, it could be plausible within a simulation sense. Now he goes into the video game theory, and this is his sequel to the original, the simulated multiverse. And he basically, since he's a computer scientist, he goes into the reasonings of programming, gates and binary code and quantum qubits. This one goes into the ideas of the Mandela effect. It's hard to see exactly. It sounds like science fiction, but then he brings up, for example, Philip K. Dick, and Philip K. Dick basically believed, this guy was the author of Man in the High Castle and Electric Sheep Dreaming and so forth. That was like the inspiration for Blade Runner. And, he basically goes into this, and you can read it. I think it's a good book. I got to be more hesitant on how much I read. I'm trying to formulate my structure better because, some of my red pill videos go through certain longer chapters, and I feel that they might be taken down for copyright, which what my intentions were never to steal or keep people from buying the books. In fact, it was the contrary, to prove my point in my arguments, and furthermore to basically, you know, anyway, the Man in the High Castle and Philip K. Dick basically said, like, look, I believe that he came out and said that I think this world is simulated. And furthermore, he came out and said that Man in the High Castle were Nazis and Japan won the World War, the Axis, and basically took over America. He claims he shifted and came from a reality that was basically like that. And we can't discount some of the more exotic quantum because, there is the paperwork from the quantum scientists at CERN. Shit. The CERN. The papers that in scientific theory on the cautions of using it for the first time were basically like mathematics state that this will cause retrocausal and future causal like harm, like basically to the fabric of the universe due to the level of energy output and how they're smashing the particles. And even though we don't have any direct evidence that anything is altering on a severe case, things like that can explain the Mandela effect. But the Mandela effect can also be, oh shit, oh shit, yeah, be sure to watch that. The whole idea that it could be causing from the Matrix itself being hemorrhaged by events in the game like CERN, or by actual quantum hemorrhaging within the simulation itself. I've gone into the theory that, well, what if we live in a haptic neuropathway infused, serial experiments laying matrix system, uh and the ones who are like truly able to comprehend and be aware are merely the constituency and politicians and kings and queens and rich business elites who survived the cataclysms like some Fallout shit, and this was our way to live a normal life. You never know. It's like the brain in the vat theory. We might actually be dead people living in an advanced simulation from an event just like that. The aliens, the same idea, going back to Ready Player One. It could be that some beings are somehow being created, or archon systems, and they become self-aware programs. I think the nature of NPCs would be like some become self-aware, like the robot Morty and Rick and Morty, like, I'm alive, mother, I love you. And basically Philip K. Dick basically saying, like, I came from a whole different map, bro, a different circumstance. And of course, Rizwan Vert talks about his own experience with VR and how realistic it is. And he's talking about being near the Googleplex of like the no going back, era of what would you call that? Event Horizon Ground Zero event, a singularity of sorts. This is talking about alternate timelines. And basically, it could be that whoever the scriptwriters are, these advanced chthonic, cosmic horror scale entities, perhaps what the the Gnostics were really talking about, and Demiurge is not Yahweh, but Yaldabaoth, maybe. Or, sorry, El Elyon, the Most High El. It could be that was his understanding. And Yahweh was just an irrelevant, deceptive image. And this guy talks, Rizwan talks about the Mandela effect. And basically, he gets into the science of code into this book. And, the thing about the Mandela effect is, it's never real until it hits you. And that's the sad thing about the Mandela effect. Until a personal version of the Mandela effect hits you, you're not going to believe in quantum hemorrhaging or timeline violations, because it does seem illogical, but based on our current understandings. But then again, we go on our understandings of knowledge through textbooks we read in school and that are authorized opinions that stem from Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Ford. Not to have people who think like this and apply this science. It's mainly up to an oligarchy to decide that was their vision and that's what they got. It's talking about even the spiritual nature here. Like, could they just be random golem entities? Could they just be sprites engineered from a quantum matrix motherboard, Deus Ex Machina style? Because, if you study my Quantum Edge video, we're talking about, for example, Cyborg Soldier 2050. Super soldier augmentation. France has admitted, because the Chinese and the United States have both been in an arms race for technological and mutated cyborg super soldiers, that basically France entered the race for the arms. You can watch that video for yourself, but I'll bring up just an example. France, China, USA, cyborg arms race. The global military technological competition centers on accelerating race for artificial intelligence and autonomous robots among the US, China, and European nations like France. Rather than biological cyborgs, the focus is on physical AI swarming drones and the collaborative combat units with algorithms operate faster than human reaction times. But realistically, when you're getting into things like nanobots, what's to really stop the augmentation of people through like an injection of a nano serum, a smart dust? Smart dust is real. They're already talking about having, engineered robotic insects and enhanced mosquitoes, to the point where you got the Dolly the sheep. Dolly was real. And that was just rudimentary public cloning. They even say you can get anything cloned now, like a pet, for example, but for like some money. But they stop at humans for ethical reasons. But you got to see shit like CRISPR, and this matters for my argument. Enhanced with artificial intelligence, or just by this nature, Resident Evil is no longer fiction, ladies and gentlemen. The thing that stops Resident Evil from normal reality is ethics. And that's the truth. And it makes you really consider what Lebensborn, the Nordic German Nazi hybrid farm, what was it all about? This guy goes into autonoma and chaos theory, and it's a good book to pick up. I got to be careful with what I read anymore, and I apologize if you were watching for more in-depth reading, and I still will. I got to proofread and figure out just how much I should read, and of course you can read what's on screen and stop the screen if you'd like, but I don't have the intention. That's not my intent for doing this. I'm trying to find. Oh, it does show that the table of contents. I'm sorry. I'm not used to Kindle on the computer. So, some far out science. This is where he talks about the multiverse theory. Going into frames and how pixels work. Sliding door and overlapping timelines, black holes and wormholes, different type of multiverse. And this guy's an MIT scientist. He's going on the aspects of true hardcore science, and to actually, he's bringing up Dr. Martin Kruzekal at UCLA, basically backing up his theory of this universal theory. You need to watch some content on Rizwan Burke, or read these books, because they're incredible. He talks about positive timelines, negative timelines, the universe theory, and it's not that bad. Like, his argument was pretty solid. I actually discovered this book on Coast to Coast AM, listening to the radio when I was in the joint. You know, going in the Schrodinger's wave functions, and like the whole idea that when you turn away, it's like when you do it in any other game. The resources respective to the observer are actually saved as an asset, and there's some sort of generational field that builds macrocosmic quantum structures that can't be passed through like strong nuclear forces, but may through some form of weak nuclear force manipulation. You know, something. People. I think there's greatly something to it, and the ramifications of the theory of simulation theory. Is magic just a way to exploit the system? People who have, through the examples of Project, uh, you know, Scan 8, Grow Flame, Sunstreak, Stargate, etc. Did they find a way to become augmented like the Matrix, perhaps? And it wasn't always that way, because with simulation and video game implies jailbreaking your body, the quantum observer, and furthermore, cheat codes, Game Shark, like any percent ways to achieve things in life, like speedrunners. Maybe that's the underlying meaning of the red pills with the sunglasses and Neo. Could it be that if you start getting too out of line with questioning, you alert the demiurge and the archons? You're a stupid little Lulu or slave, as it is said in in the ancient traditions of like the Zechariah Sitchin and Michael Tellinger's version of these Sumerian tablets, and basically translations of it itself. Lu.lu, Lulu, primitive, pet, slave, etc. It could be that it's some form of eldritch, Mass Effect, Borg, maybe from the Battlestars, Star Trek level intelligence. And I went into, it could be that other intelligences that have generated worlds and servers like any other game could be the results of, non-human intelligence. Their craft come from their servers, their worlds, and somehow compatibility happens and intermeshing. And it just seems that living quantum within frequency bandwidths, living within the possibilities or superpositions, perhaps, of wavelength possibilities made manifest through observation and particle certainty. Over time, these observation devices and people and quantum machines intermesh with their, deluge or whatever the hell it is that's generated from observation. And it just helps generate the matrix field, And when I find certain sections, I will update the simulation argument. This was just my introduction into simulation theory, and I think that if you stick around with me, I'll get into reading that book some more and certain sections. This was just the introduction to sim theory. And what do you think, guys? Leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you are at, and I will see you all next time. The Matrix has you. Wake up. Damn, son, where'd you find this?